I'd buy that for $1. I haven't got a damn clue about Randy Moore and his fucking Oreos.
In the time that it was being made, like in the late, especially the things from like the 80s to mid-80s, people didn't get the joke, I guess, if you want to call it satirical, right? There's Robocop, which is this hyper-masculine sort of spaghetti Western-esque sci-fi thing. I mean, even if you listen to the soundtrack and everything, it's like, it's very bum, 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 right?
Yeah.
It's very much like badge gun, let's go out there with a horse, John Wayne kind of stuff. And the lampoon of it is not only the hyper-violence, but also the dehumanization and all these other themes. There's the way that propaganda works in the media and so many things to unpack with it. That, of course, continues to carry through with things like Starship Troopers. Total Recall is an interesting one because it connects back to Philip K. Dick and his original story. We Can Remember It For You Wholesale, which, again, Verhoeven took some liberties with that, but he made it interesting and made it his own. Starship Troopers, he just completely threw out Heinlein's novel. I mean, he's famously quoted as saying that it was a fascistic work, it was hyper-militaristic, and he didn't even bother wanting to read it. He just chucked it, and he was like, we're going to do something different here. We're going to make a satire out of it. And I really love that. But I think that all of these sort of anti-fascist works are tied together with Paul Verhoeven's origin story. So he was born, I think, in 1938 and in Amsterdam, if I remember correctly, right?
He went to The Hague, right?
In 1943, his family moved to The Hague when The Hague was, I think, the head of Nazi Germany's Strategic Command, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I can only imagine what he saw that left such an imprint on his early, like 5, 6, 7, 10-year-old brain to make him want to make the world never forget or fall back into what we're probably experiencing right now globally. And he's such an interesting dude. Like, I think Herzog might be around the same age as him. And he, again, very similar kind of, I think he was Herzog was like a war orphan and traveled around the, as a really, really little kid, like 8, 9 years old, was like traveling around Europe in the aftermath and decimation of World War II and experiencing just horrible conditions of famine and destruction and everything else. And you see his worldview coming through. And you can also see Verhoeven's idea, like being in The Hague and being in this epicenter of militaristic, fascistic propaganda. What does that radiate outward into the world? So thanks for joining us, everybody. Juan Carlos, take it away. Why do you love Paul Verhoeven, and where do you want to start with it?
Oh my gosh, I think the first time I saw a Verhoeven movie, I mean, it must have been, I think it was Total Recall, honestly. And I was blown away. At the time, I was so young when I first saw this movie, right? So I'm looking at this with just a wide-eyed type of approach, right? I don't notice and really realize what it's about. And the whole concept of this neo-totalitarian state completely is like above and beyond the scope of what I'm curious about. And I think it lends itself to what Verhoeven really is about, right? Which is using satire in a way that's almost so subtle that if you don't necessarily look for it, you can just confuse these with just being epic sci-fi action movies, which ultimately is what they were for me, right? These are some just bonkers, wild, rated R, super bloody, interesting, fascinating movies. And then over the course of several years, it becomes obvious what they are, right? But at the start, the interest in them is Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? And being excited about these from just a nascent space of interested in action movies. And this is the 80s, and that's a very different time for action. I think I look at it from that sense of, hey, these are the things that these movies are about, and then these are the things that these movies are really about. And it's pretty easy when you get a little bit older and you're, past like 12, to start going, oh, I see what some of the satire is. And he's not trying to be bashful about it, right? There's no sense of, oh, he doesn't tell you what this is about, especially when you get to Starship Troopers. He's 100%, this is a fascist state. So the question isn't necessarily, oh, is what he's doing right or wrong? Is this a fascist, indictment of fascism? Or is it really an indictment of your perception of it as a result of living through a movie like that and then still being interested in the wrong side of history, essentially? So you're going along with these troopers, right? And it's very challenging at the end not to still root for them. It's challenging not to find them to be winning and you're excited about that win. And so that's where I see sort of the unique play of what Verhoeven's about. He wants to take you there. He wants you to see it. And then he wants you to ask these questions. And even when you've finished watching this movie, are you willing to ask that difficult question? And maybe you can't, right? Maybe you can't change your own mind. And that's, I think, the crux of what he's really challenging you in those moments, which I love.
Well, it was kind of interesting when I was starting to think about doing this series with people, and you were one of the first ones who DM'd me and said, hey, I want to be in on this and I want to do Verhoeven. What is the work that you're currently doing? Because you were telling me all about mental models. I think you've got a new card deck product that's out there. Tell us a little bit about what you've been doing and how it kind of dovetails into the idea of challenging perceptions.
Yeah, 100%. So I think over the last, say, 5-6 years, I started to dive in because I essentially was a filmmaker. I made a big change. It kind of caused a schism in my life and my identity. And I had this moment of revelation, I think, where I went, I think that my identity shouldn't be just my job, right? Which ultimately sounds funny when you say it out loud, but realistically, it made me reconsider what that sense of self is. And then from the ashes, I sort of pulled things together, and like kintsugi, golden joinery, I made something new. And I think that helped with the way that I started to think about these models can really change the way that I think and see. And so where do I look at cognitive biases? Where do I look at these different challenges that I've put inside, I've limited myself for whatever reason. And through understanding some of my limiting beliefs, through being able to see sort of around the corner about what could be a better sediment and concrete for myself, I think it allowed me to then say, oh, you know what? I'm going to start writing down these mental models. And mental models are nothing but a lens to see the world, right? So it can be anything as simple as, like, say, Occam's razor, the simplest path is the best, to, second order thinking, which is one that I've been thinking about a lot recently, about what are the consequences after first order thinking, which is what most of us do, into second order thinking, the if then what, right? As you continue to see the different consequences, it really allows you to sort of broaden your view about what are the things that you're not recognizing. Like a canonical, fun example of this is Balloon Fest. Have you heard of Balloon Fest? It's like the
I love Balloon Fest.
United Way.
Balloon Fest is fantastic. All right. So for people who don't know what Balloon Fest is, don't go Google it. Listen to us. We'll tell you everything you need to know. So it was in the early mid 1980s.
Yeah.
I think, right? And essentially, was it Chicago? Where was it? I can't remember. Cleveland. Yes. All right. It was like a Midwestern kind of thing where they were going to do this big charity, biggest release of balloons ever kind of thing. And I forget how many millions of balloons that they filled up and
like 2.5 mil.
It was
they ended up with 1.5 mil.
Where they were trying to break this world record, and there were all this news coverage and everything. It was going to be this great, everybody's going to be so happy. We're all going to cheer, and charity's going to make money. We're going to bring attention to the local community and local businesses, and everybody's going to participate. And they let all these balloons up into the air. And then they didn't realize what happens when you put, 1.5 million balloons in the sky. It essentially becomes a plastic weather event of diabolical proportions where the balloons slowly drifted over lakes and into the environment. They were killing birds. I think there was a thing. Weren't there people on a lake that got stranded? No one could get to them. So people died. Yeah, they were people that died because of these balloons. So where does the first and second order thinking come in when conceiving that idea? It's so we got to the point where people are happy and they're oh, this is gonna be a great thing for charity.
First order.
Second order is where they didn't go. right?
Right. The consequences of that event, right? So it's the weather changed on them. Should they have actually released those balloons? The answer is obviously not. Like, it caused havoc. And to your point, when you have something where you see there's negative consequences, it's easy in hindsight to say, man, what a bunch of dummies, right? Why didn't they foresee any of this? But that's true for a lot of us. And so I think with mental models, it's a lot about putting the lens on yourself. When you're in those places and spaces, are you doing that right kind of thinking? Because to your point, you don't want to be the cause for some couple of people to die, right? And that's what happened with Balloon Fest. You have all of these issues environmentally that then take months and months and months to get out of, right? And so when I think about mental models as a whole, that's where I started to go, you know what, I love these. And when I think enough about these, it helps me understand and make better decisions holistically. So I started to, on like a little, note card, write out a mental model and just have it for myself, right? And I just kept on doing it. And then I had like a little stack of maybe 100 of these models. And I went, you know what? I feel like I'm getting somewhere, and I enjoying what I'm thinking of and seeing the world. I wonder if other people could take some of this and use it in their own lives. And that's when I started to make the deck. I did a little Kickstarter last year and started to really build out this concept for what are the ways in which we need to rethink the way we think. And the act of thinking is a radical one, especially now. And I think that's where I started to sort of go back into sort of a fundamentals type of approach, because, we're coming out of the information age, right? And in that time period, you have the concept is, hey, I'm really good at filtering stuff. So things are coming out of there and we're going, okay, great. And then you have the attention economy, right? And in the attention economy, we obviously know persuasive dark patterns are the way that algorithms essentially feed us different things. And, you obviously do a lot of social media. So you get where I'm going, where, you give this thing the capacity to take you on a ride, whatever it is, and you give your attention to it, and thereby you consume and have polarized views as a result of what you imbibe, right? And so we then leave that now, and we're going into what I've been calling the manipulation age, which is essentially the age of AI. And that's where we're flattening ourselves in terms of popular thought, because ultimately these LLMs are essentially compressing consensus. And ultimately what occurs if you allow the permission structures of an LLM to tell you how to think, what to feel, you're building, creating on those kinds of constructs. And I'm a big proponent of AI otherwise. So this is not me poo-pooing on the concept of AI, but how you utilize it is going to be more and more imperative, because without thinking about it and without using your own independent thought, then you're going to suffer the consequences of agreeing and allowing your own sense of self and your own thoughts to dissolve into the mean. And obviously what happens is thinking ultimately becomes just this averaging of the mean if you allow it to be. And so our most unique way that we can exist, at least from my perspective, is to be able to be an independent thinker, to be able to have a thought that is your own, because ultimately everyone's coming for you, right? And it's our job as humans to have one thing that makes us unique, especially in this age where everything becomes automated. AI becomes capable of doing almost any type of work. The unique piece of us is our own ability to create thought. And so that's where I think I've really started to focus that time and energy and utilize that to essentially create a way for us to develop that. And mental models is the practice to be able to create that independent thought.
Yeah. And everybody needs to follow Juan Carlos. Your Instagram is fantastic. It's so much better than like my social media. My social media, I shit post like day in and day out. You actually have like a curated, you have an aesthetic, you have a message, you're putting like a very distinct like voice and everything. Mine is like, I'm like, hey, MAGA, go fuck yourself. And I roll over in bed, so different ways to carve that up. So Juan Carlos and I actually met when we were professional propagandists. I mean, it's
not untrue.
It's not untrue. I like to think that we were on the good side. When I started doing that, it's funny, a friend of mine, we were working for a film company at the same time, and a lot of the projects that we had were documentary things, but we also had I think the year that I left, I don't know if you were still there after that time, but It was the year that Spotlight came out. We got the Oscar for Spotlight.
That was my last year too.
Yeah. So that's about when I took off from there. But around that same time, I had a really good friend who had come to LA and he wanted to be an actor and whatever else. And he now, I think, produces the Matt Walsh podcast. If you know Matt Walsh. Yeah. The like super psychotic, transphobic lunatic. Like, am I a racist? Was like, and this is a black dude who produces this. And I'm sitting there like, I mean, you know, I know that we used to sit around in my apartment and watch Boondocks. I didn't know that his favorite character was Uncle Ruckus, but you know, whatever, man. I mean, it's like, he produced the Am I a Racist documentary with Matt Walsh. I'm like, really, dude? Really? All right. Wow. That's cool. So I guess somebody went to the dark side on that. But, you know, from being professional propagandists, quote unquote, like, I don't know if Paul Verhoeven was a genius or if at the end of the day, it didn't quite work out the way that he wanted, because I really feel at this point that subtext and satire are not necessarily great tools for making people understand what you're trying to communicate. I'll go back to like 1999. I want to say there was a dude in New York. The New York cops broke down his door. I wish I remember the guy's name. I just remember the headline in this interaction I had. I think they shot him something like 40 times. I don't remember what this guy's name was. I apologize. You guys can look it up later. But they shot him like 40 times, the cops. And what ended up coming of that was it was very polarized in the news. And some of my friends were like, well, he must have done something that he deserved it. I'm like, how can anybody deserve to be shot 40 times? And I remember I was having dinner and my friend was there with his fiance, and she was kind of like a tried and true sort of racist, really like phrenology kind of. This was in Florida in the South in like the late 90s. And she just wasn't in the headspace where she thinks about these things more deeply. And so she's like, I don't see a problem with it. Obviously, the cops felt like they needed to shoot him X number of times. It's up to them. That's why we pay them to make those decisions. And I sat there and I kind of looked down for a second and looked around. And I go, no, I agree with you, because, you know, black people are obviously different than us physically. They can't be killed by conventional weapons. They're full of evil black devil goo, and you have to shoot them at least 40 times. Otherwise, they're just going to tank it and their body will regenerate like Wolverine. And she sat there, looked at me and goes, they are very different like that. They do have that. And I'm sitting there like, oh my God, no.
That's what you took from that?
That's what you took from my, like, so that's sometimes how I feel about satire, like Paul Verhoeven and the way he constructs these things. Like, on face value, a lot of guys who love action movies and stuff, they love Robocop. They think it's a very masculine kind of thing. Starship Troopers. If you watch the one that Verhoeven did, it's brilliant. But as a franchise, there are like 2 horrible direct-to-video sequels and an animated series and some other stuff around it. And we mentioned the Hyland's original story is very fascistic, and, you know, Hyland was a weird dude. And I wonder sometimes if those other direct-to-video sequels and animated thing and everything, there's got to be like at least 50, 60% of the people that saw Starship Troopers who didn't get it. They just watched it and they go like, oh yeah, well they fight the bugs, right? Completely over their head. Is it doing anybody any good to be so deep in the satire like that?
It's such a fascinating problem that I think Verhoeven tries to solve. And the way that he does it is, and it's funny because it's not subtle, right? The satire is well known when you see it. And I feel, you know, the hard part is that I think a lot of those folks still saw they read that headline. They noticed the like SS jerseys that these, you know, uniforms they're working.
Nazi.
Yeah, they're so obviously Nazis in Starship Troopers. And yet
kind of wanted, like when we had all that stuff going on in Minneapolis with ICE and the protests and everything, and that jackass, Greg Bovino, who I think he got kicked down. I think they sent him back here to California. I don't know what he's doing now, but he's still probably being a monster somewhere. And he had that photo shoot where he had like the big flowing Nazi looking duster. Did you see this?
No.
Yeah, like he decided he's like, oh, I'm gonna make my uniform. My uniform is gonna look like he looks like Neil Patrick Harris from Starship Troopers. And I can imagine like Trump or somebody coming out there and being like, he doesn't look like a Nazi. It's like Starship Troopers. Everybody loves Neil Patrick Harris. Very gay, very nice. He's a good guy. You know, like, I can imagine them like using the satire to justify the monstrosity of the present. Yeah, it's all hyper reality, right? Like we live in this ecosystem of just everything is an exercise in these horrible, godforsaken aesthetics. And we've gone so deep into like Verhoeven is making fun of Nazis and he's wrapping in this one thing, but now we can point to that and say it's innocent if somebody else does this other thing. I wonder at what point do we get out of the hyper real and start to backtrack into the real so we can sort of escape this cycle of satire and
Do you
propaganda.
think there is an escape from the hyper real? Because I guess when I look at the machine that we've created, it feels like it just accelerates itself. And the ways in which we're pushing, especially with AI that allows us to build any narrative we want, regardless with however we want to see the world, is possible, right? And, you know, pennies comparatively. And so if you're in a space where you're creating and building towards these very intense and divisive universes that we're currently capable of doing, does it dissolve somehow into real? Or, you know, I'm reading Simulacra and Simulacrum right now, which is like way heady. And actually,
I've got a copy of it over in my bedroom.
It's
I love the portrayal.
I'm glad that you can read it well. It takes me like 6 reads to read 1 page, but the concept of it, I think, is this: we're already so far down the road on simulation, right? And the ways in which we reproduce simulated things allows us only to now build on top of simulation, right? And that in and of itself makes it really hard for me to believe, at least, that we're not going to continue down that path. And
but it also ties into what you're talking about identity and how we construct it and what is our actual identity. Is it this curated version that we put out about ourselves on social media? Like, one of the things that drives me nuts, there is nothing in the business world, in the universe of commerce, that comes from me being on LinkedIn. So I've basically just thrown a Molotov cocktail at that platform because I think it's the most, of all of the creepy things about social media, that to me is the most Orwellian, in the way that like it polices your behavior internally. Like, people go onto LinkedIn and they're like, well, you know, I'm super passionate about, you know, about figuring out new KPIs for the, like, no, you're not. We all know you're not. But you have this internal pressure of like, I have to say certain things so that, and it's like this real existential, like, I need to eat, I need to pay rent, I need to make sure that everyone knows that I'm good and complacent, and I'm a good drone, right. You know, and it feels like whenever I log on there, like I'm living in an authoritative, it's like the most police state cyberpunk dystopic kind of William Gibson-esque. But people don't think of it. People think of LinkedIn as being innocuous, in the same way that I think like they look at Verhoeven movies as fitting into that very safe 1980s sort of aesthetic that you used to get from like the same kind of thing as like a Van Damme movie. You get that same high out of watching Robocop as you probably do out of watching Bloodsport, right? But, you know, Verhoeven is operating at such a different level. So,
before we jump off that, so 100% agree with you. I think one of the challenges there is what's better. And this is sort of like the challenge that you have with a Verhoeven movie, right? Which is he's going to do something that makes it look like there's a bad guy, right? And there's good guys. But reality is, for something like LinkedIn, great example of the interesting part about the world is how you flatten someone's perception of self to be able to fit into that mold, right? And it's exactly as you're noting, which is it's so much more subtle, but so much more destructive for us to have to force fit ourselves so that we can feel culturally relevant. And it's our job to want, hey, I need these likes, I need these comments, I want this because I've been told that with this I get power, with this I get some level of notoriety, Or if it's less vain, it's I want to be able to have a thought here and for people to hear me, right? I mean, we all want to raise our hands and be able to say something and for people to listen and understand, because the relevance of our lives is many times related to our relevance in our communities, right? In our places and spaces. And so if you have to show up somewhere in a specific way, what an interesting and challenging thing to do, which is to change yourself to fit that space, because fundamentally you won't win unless you're governed and work by its rules. So in a lot of ways, the way that Verhoeven has done it, which is, someone did something, they stole your memory, they edited your stuff, they created a way for you to function in the world, right? These are all very overt, and Orwell's a great example, right? 1984 is like a smash you over the face type of approach that looks really evil and obvious. But for us in our world, it's so much better to do it a different way. How do we create a way for you to think? Then, no matter what happens, you already agree that that's the way that you think, right? So you've already been given a way to exist and you agree wholesale to that. And then it's easy for someone to say, oh, well, if you want to succeed here, just do these different steps. And you're like, oh, well, I want to succeed, so let me go ahead and do those exact steps. And so exactly to your point, something like LinkedIn becomes the game, but it's only like the very top of the problem. The real problem is everything that's allowed here that gets you to this tiny little piece that is, oh, I'm going to play the LinkedIn game. And then you look at it and you're like, the banality of this. Oh my God.
Yeah, I don't even know if it's the banality. I guess it like banality in the sense of like banality or evil kind of banality. Like I remember I was in Bologna a couple of years ago over in Italy, and this is when Umberto Eco was still a professor at the university over there, and like if you know his definitions of like fascism and the his thinking on the whole process of like what are the conditions which create fascism? What are the ways the society functions under fascism? He really delves into all that. And he was one of the pioneers of creating the academic field of semiotics and, what symbols, quote unquote, mean to us in society. If you ever watched the Sean Connery film, in the Name of the Rose, right? Or Color of the Rose? I forget it. For some reason, it's slipping my mind right now, but, Sean Connery plays a monk, and he has to sort of unravel a whole mystery that's wrapped in all these symbols and things from a secret society. Umberto Eco wrote that as sort of an entry path into his academic framework about semiotics. So really interesting dude. But if you take away the scary Nazi uniforms, the whole like that meme you see on the internet from the comedy team Mitchell and Webb over in the UK, Are We the Baddies? Right?
Best.
Like if you start stripping
I love
away,
that you bring that up.
Yeah,
it's my favorite. So few people know about that.
Oh, it's he's talking about the skull pan, and he's
we the baddies?
He's like, well, no, those are the skulls of our enemy. Exactly. When you start to like deconstruct the things that you think are normal, when you start to strip away the aesthetics of fascism, what are you left with? And to me, I feel sometimes you're left with this weird, vacant conformity. You're left with like the Costco guys. Do you remember when they were big last year, right? Where it's like the idea that this dude and his son would go to Costco every day and make videos of it, and they get out there and they're like, we're Costco guys. Of course we eat giant cookies while we're trying to buy a 50-pound bag of mayonnaise or whatever the hell they're doing. And on the surface, it's like, oh, it's just a dad and his kid. They're trying to make content. But to me, it's almost this like, it's this weird cargo cult sort of ritual where they really want to be popular. They really want to make money. And so they go to this giant store that they're familiar with, that they shop at, and they start to voluntarily make commercials essentially for this place where they're spending their own money. And then the cycle feeds back into itself where the algorithm picks it up, and then they eventually start making money from just this ritual of worship of the Commerce Act in and of itself. And I mean, it fizzles out, like these things fizzle out because people get bored with it and they're like, okay, next thing, crumpled up and garbage. But before that happened, they were on like the Tonight Show. They got massively huge. And that's what I think that LinkedIn and all of these sort of related self-policing systems that we create for ourselves in the algorithm do. And that dehumanization was really telegraphed in Robocop. So let's break Robocop down for people. Robocop starts out with a corporation called OCP, Omni Consumer Products, and they're in Detroit. Detroit is a quote unquote failing city. And just like you see in the Republican Party now, every major city is a failing city. It's a failed state. It's a this, it's that, right? Bankrupt, terribly mismanaged. We don't really know that, or we don't. We only know what we are told through the in-universe media, through the boardroom at OCP. You know, these things, we don't have any actual context for what it's like to live in Detroit. We don't have any context. Like the mayor and these other sort of, you know, governmental figures aren't really ever seen or explored, you know, like a little glimpse here and glimpse there, but we only see it through the lens of OCP and those related to OCP, right?
Yeah.
So Omni Consumer Products wants to essentially replace the government police force with a private police force, and they want to control it as an intellectual property. So they've created a series of experiments. Some are robots, some are cyborgs, and ultimately what they come up with is Robocop, where this police officer named Murphy was I don't remember if he was like a new cop. I think he might have moved from
transferred
he came
from somewhere else. So he's
and
coming
got a
in,
young
it's like
family.
his first day on like the worst job.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
It's like, you know, it's the, what would come later, like training day kind of a thing, right? Like you want to see how it is in Detroit, you know, it's like this predates that kind of a thing. And I think in some ways it takes those 70s kind of New Yorky, sweaty dramas and Serpico and all that kind of stuff and brings it into the science fiction action hyper reality of the 1980s. And Murphy is a new transplant. He's got a young family, and it's like his first day on the job, and he ends up getting just completely massacred in a was it a drug bust?
No,
Or was that part two? It was something.
They steal all of this money. I think it's like a bank heist.
Bank heist.
Yeah. So but they blew up all the money. So they're coming in real hot after this, you know, heist. And they're like, you burned all the money, and then they're getting tailed by Murphy, right?
Yeah, that's right. And so anyway, he ends up getting killed, and OCP basically takes his body and rebuilds him into Robocop. They suppress his memories of being Murphy. They suppress his emotions. They dehumanize him into what they believe will be a more effective peacekeeper. And when he is completely dehumanized, he then takes on this mythological role. And when I say mythological, I mean it's really like this cowboy thing that we were talking about before, this Lone Ranger-esque. That's when, you know, the orchestral themes come in. He has a leg that opens up to become like a shootout at the OK Corral style holster for his gigantic gun. You know, he's doing all these like little like drawing tricks and trick shooting and all this kind of stuff. It is the classic American Western hero transposed into this cyberpunk dystopia. So take it from there.
Well, I think first off, I think Verhoeven, in one of his interviews, he chats about how he considers Robocop to be American Jesus, right? And so there's this beautiful moment that I didn't notice up until like my last watch, which is when he's getting shot. First thing that happens is they shoot off his hand, right? Mm-hmm. So immediately he's going crucifixion style out in this big, bold way.
And Verhoeven is, I don't remember exactly what sect or whatever he's connected to, but I think he's part of some kind of a big sort of Christian organization. And didn't he write a book on Jesus of Nazareth as well, I think?
I don't know.
Well, you guys can Google that on Wikipedia or whatever. There was this interesting connection between Verhoeven's Christianity and faith and some of his later projects and what he's talking about here.
Yeah. So what you're looking at then is he's getting, you know, on a cross, right? And then later in the movie, they have him literally walk on water, right? To kill the big baddie, right? So it's like a fascinating piece of it. But then when I look at you know, Robocop from just the perspective of what's the message that's being attempted to be told to us. You're in this interesting neo-totalitarian state. And to your point, you don't know that much about what OCP does, but what you do realize is they're privatizing what are public, you know, constructs. These are institutions, right? So police are being privatized in their entirety. And they're trying to bring in these machines to do that job, right? And they're in this space and place of saying, hey, now that we own the police and we're the ones that essentially govern it, what are we doing here and how do we do it to the best of our ability? And so they create this bot, right? And the initial scene, which is like one of the most interesting and bloodiest scenes, they're in the main megacorp office for OCP and they just murder one of the peon managers that are at this table, right? And no one blinks an eye. And so there's like a very interesting moment of this where you're going, wow, no one cares. They come in, they're like, "Oh, it was his day anyway, right? Everyone just watched this person get murdered." So to your point about that hyper real, that's there. But the undercurrent, and this goes to the satire of it, is obviously this is like way out of bounds for a regular occurrence in a board meeting, but you accept it. Even in that moment, you sort of accept the way that they callously just overlook, oh, this guy's gone. And, the chairman and like the president of this company are having a conversation about like, you should have, this is going to be really challenging for us to open with this thing in 6 months if it's not working right. Right. So they don't care about the person. And that's a big part. Dehumanization of people in this space is important. But the thing that is interesting that I find to be the most curious about is the subtext of what's occurring, which is around this, what else is privatized in this world? And when I look at that and make sort of a tangential line to what's happening to us here today, you have the Trump administration running on Doge, right? And especially as you see it defund different things like USAID, et cetera, you're seeing some of those same constructs of, it's not necessarily that they're exactly the same, right? But you're seeing some of the same constructs now and shaped.
Yeah, no,
right?
okay. So let's at this place that Juan Carlos and I used to work at, it was funded by this billionaire, and I don't know how many times there were like weird people that would walk into the politicians and different whoever, and on more than one occasion, like Elon Musk did come in, and I don't know if you ever ran into him or had to interact with him. Man, well, first of all, the guy that owned this company, I would feel worse about disparaging him, but he's kind of lost the plot like over the last year or two. He had like he would have conversations. He's a very soft-spoken guy, but he would constantly have this weird, I'm going to say, idol worship thing with Elon Musk. There was like a thing that was going on with him where he was like, well, Elon says this and Elon says that. He was like really invested in Elon being perceived as cooler, or Elon, because they were, I guess, involved in eBay and PayPal and the minutia of all that kind of stuff together. And he just like, he thought the world of Elon. And, Elon, like one or two times Elon came in, and I always find this funny when I post something on social media about Elon and people come in, they're like, oh, you don't know anything about him. Like, I have been in the room with Elon Musk more times than you will ever be anywhere near Elon. Like, I'm telling you this because I truly, he is such a goddamn moron. When people say, oh, you just didn't want him to rescue the Thai kid, like, this was the first shot across the bow. I lost actually friends on Facebook because of this, because people had gone on like years ago during that Thai rescue thing, and he made the submarine. Do you remember? And I just replied, I was like, he invented a rigid metal submarine to go through a twisting, turning thing, and then he was mad they couldn't use it. You know what I mean? It's this insane, like, he's like, why aren't they using my submarine? Well, it plays MP3s. Like, the hell care? You can't get, that's why they have a rescue bag so that people can move around and whatever. So anyway, I'm in this, I'm like in the break room, and Elon is in there, and I was getting a coffee, that little second floor front break room that we used to have there. And I was like getting a coffee, and like Elon Musk is in there, and he's like, oh, are you getting a coffee for me? And I just look at him, I go, No, you're a grown man. Get your own coffee. And I just walk past and walk past. I'm like, what am I supposed? I'm not here to make you. I'm like, we're like mid-level executives of this guy. I'm not getting you a coffee, Elon Musk. And so the idea that all this privatization is happening, the gutting of NASA, the gutting of all these government institutions at the whim of these people who really don't care either way at the end of the day. It's just a game to them.
I think that's the funny thing, because in some ways, maybe that's true.
Yeah.
But I actually believe in people's attempt to do something intentioned well. And that's, to me, it's a question of having a problematic model, right? And so in that space where he's making that decision, efficiency, right? And we all know this because he very widely describing this, right? Efficiency is the most important, but the cost of efficiency is the government now doesn't have some of these programs. And importantly, when you privatize some of these same pieces, right, which ultimately some of these things will get privatized, what are the second order consequences of that decision, right? What are the things that are going to happen as a result? Some things will just get murdered, right? Like USAID in September of 26 is going to just fizzle completely, right? If they have their way and nothing happens in between now and then, it goes away. Like, that's it. We're going to see the destruction of that entire program. For other things, they will just get subsumed by some other entities and will fund those entities, right? And what will they do, and what is the cost of that? And I think we don't ask ourselves that enough. We just want to say, okay, well, the government shouldn't, we want it to be lean, right? And obviously this is like the whole story of this.
Yeah. But again, like drawing a parallel between Elon Musk and OCP, like, let's look at this and think about SpaceX, right?
Yeah.
So you look at that and you go, some people may look at that and go, like, well, he's trying to get us to Mars. He's got this great. I go, no, he's trying to rob us blind, because the gutting of the space agencies, NASA and related functions that we had in the United States, started happening, or was attempting to start happening under like the Newt Gingrich era of the Republican reconfiguration in the 90s. And then under George W. Bush, we ended up moving that ball further down the line into actual action. And what do you end up with? People go, well, the private sector can do it better and cheaper. How? Because SpaceX uses all of our NASA infrastructure. The way that JPL here in California works is that it's an offshoot of Caltech. So the money's actually going to Caltech, and then Caltech runs the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. So you're already like 2 levels deep there. But now you've got SpaceX, which just basically pays the engineers from the JPL. So they're paying Caltech to pay so you're adding this other layer, and there's a profit motive on top of it. We're spending so much more money than NASA ever spent for literally the same people. All it is putting somebody in the middle of it to collect money and extract that wealth from the United States, from the people.
What you see, I think, and it's fun because in Robocop, you have our friend Murphy, right? And Murphy has several directives that are known, and there's one classified 4th directive, right? And the 4th directive is you can't hurt anyone from the company. And so that's where I think you see exactly what you're saying, which is when you look at a capitalist society and you invest deeply in this private sector, right, you're going to come up against that exact problem very naturally, which is that private company wants to put itself as the most important. So it can go against any moral and ethical values because its prime directive is to make money. That's its job. And it needs to, by virtue of what we've given it, right? Its directive, its goal is that. And so when you see Murphy in that space, and he has this directive as Robocop, where he can't do any harm to the company.
Right.
It's
it's interesting that when we talk about, like, what does OCP want, even in the name, omni consumer products, right? Everything, not to disparage them, Unilever, Monsanto, right? It's these giant blanket, kind of make everything, own everything kind of companies. And what is the one thing that private companies in our world have not fully taken control of yet? And that would be one of the defining characteristics of what a lot of people who study geopolitics believe is inherent to a state, and that is the monopoly of violence, right? So a state has a monopoly on violence. It is to say that they are the ones that decide who, what, and where can violence be enacted and in service of what, right? Well, OCP wants to take that last little step. They want to take that one last thing that is inherent and specific to a state and integrate it into their overall model. They want to be the police force. They want to get that last little piece. And I think if you want to make an analog to Trump, people would always ask, well, what could Trump possibly want? Because he's already a billionaire. He just wants to do what's right for the country. I go, no, he wants to blow shit up, because that's the only thing that he's not allowed to do as a billionaire. He wants to shoot missiles at things. He wants to murder people. He wants to do whatever, because those are the last taboos that you cannot buy with money alone. You also have to have governmental power to make that work. It's sort of the last fetish of the ultra billionaire class.
I mean, that's just the challenge of, I think, the ultra rich in some ways, right? That it's like being bored to death over time. So what else am I capable of doing? What haven't I done in this lifetime?
And looking at Robocop as this idea of corporations and consumerism and how they work in this machinery of fascism and dehumanization and violence and everything, we jump forward to Starship Troopers. And I think that Starship Troopers is great because it turns the lens away. We don't really get to see much of the government in Starship Troopers, or even the systems under which they operate. We watch how the systems affect the average person. So it's almost the same thing from two different angles, right?
Agreed. So Starship Troopers is fun because I think the very obvious through line is fascism, but under the spine of that story is pretty fun. One thing, and it's, service equals citizenship, is like the mantra at the start, right? And the idea is you want to be a citizen, and the only way to become or be guaranteed that is through having service to the military. And so there's this interesting nuance there that I think you can sort of gloss over the first couple of times. That is, this is a militaristic state, and to be a person in this state, you have to abide by those rules. And those are the rules that we're chatting about, earlier. And you want to then go and do your service, and you want to then, the worst thing that you can be is go through washout lane and then not become the citizen that you could have been, right? So the construct of that and the agreements in that world are sort of unique and palpable from that perspective.
And the protagonist, if we want to call him that, Rico, his journey, we start following him in high school, right? So I love the world building that Verhoeven does. In Robocop, it's done through these great interstitial propaganda kind of things that he sees on TV, which mimic sort of like the variety show, kind of like UK sort of Benny Hilly kind of things, but they're dialed up to 11 and they're hyper consumeristic. Like the whole, I'll buy that for $1. And the guy goes out with there's women dancing around and money flying out of the ceiling and everything. Well, if you look at the propaganda that's going on in Starship Troopers, it begins actually a lot more subtle. So it starts out with Michael Ironside as the teacher in the high school. And he's giving this history lesson about what was the failure of democracy? What were the failures of these things? And he's teaching it in such a banal kind of matter-of-fact way that it would be taken on the surface as any kind of lesson that you would get in a primary school here in the United States. Like all this mythologizing that we hear about, the way that the Civil War is taught, and all the kind of things that are the reason that Howard Zinn wrote People's History of the United States, to counteract this propagandistic myth making. You sort of see that playing out with Michael Ironside in a very matter of fact, here's how it is, here's why our society is like this, and here's why our society is the best, right? And Rico is playing football. You see he's kind of a meathead. He's not really into his studies, but he's a football hero, and he thinks he's like the hottest shit ever. And then all of his other friends get better positions when they join the military. They go to flight school or intelligence or whatever else. He is relegated to being in the infantry. And he at first thinks that it's beneath him, right? Because he was this hot shit quarterback guy. And then we get quote unquote attacked. We find out through context clues that we're not maybe actually being attacked by this alien race. Maybe it's a misunderstanding. Maybe it's retaliatory for something that we have done to them. But through the lens of the film, we are shown that it is an attack, right?
Yeah.
And his family dies in that attack. And he then is energized to go back in and fight to avenge his family. So it's a very blood and soil kind of rallying cry thing. And through there, he becomes more and more hardened as they go on additional military adventures and whatever else through the course of the film. Ultimately, toward the end, where he's being hailed through all these newsreels as a hero, it reminded me a lot of a guy in real life. Do you know John Basilone? So John Basilone, he was on the cover of, I think, Collier's magazine at the beginning of World War II. And he was, I think his quote was like, "Not without my boys." And there was like these, I think, a Norman Rockwell painting of him like with a chain gun, like mowing down Japanese people and everything. Because he was one of the heroes of Guadalcanal Island, which was one of the big Pacific Theater battles. And he was basically, again, similar to Captain America, if anybody out there saw the Marvel movies, he was pulled off of the front line to be like a USO kind of oddity, kind of let's sell war bonds figure, right?
Yeah.
He was the hero of Guadalcanal Island. And the thing that I know about Guadalcanal, I know it from my grandfather who had gone to Guadalcanal Island after the major battle. And what he was assigned to do, he was just a young guy from Brooklyn, a Latino dude. And he was assigned to operate a bulldozer. And he was like bulldozing the bodies of Japanese soldiers into these mass graves on Guadalcanal Island. And all he had as like PPE, protective gear, was like a bandana that he wrapped around. And he would always tell me, he's like, "It stunk so bad. He had a real thick Brooklyn accent. He's like, "It stunk so bad, son. I'll tell you, it was all these bodies. They're rotting in the South Pacific. It's hot as all hell. And I'm driving these guys and pushing them in these mass graves. And I say to myself, son, I go, there ain't nothing difference between me and these guys here. Why the hell are we on this island? Why the hell are we doing anything, son? I don't know why, we got to be killing each other. Don't never join the military, son." Those are like, so that's my big like World War II lesson that I was getting from my grandfather was, what the fuck, what are we doing here? Why are we doing this? So John Basilone was this figure that they propped up and made like a Johnny Rico kind of character. And when he was outside of the framework of being a frontline soldier, he became very depressed. He had some struggles with substance abuse, alcohol, and things like that, because he felt like he had either dishonored the memory of the people that he was with, or that, he wasn't out there risking his life. He had a lot of like survivor's guilt kind of stuff going on. And you don't hear that part. And we don't see that in Starship Troopers. We don't see Rico mourning his family anymore after he goes into the infantry and he's fighting on the front line. We don't see him mourning the soldiers that are lost. He just keeps on becoming further and further hardened, detached, gray stone. And at the end of it, once he is, again, in that great Verhoeven way, dehumanized to no longer care about his girlfriend or ex-girlfriend or whatever, played by Denise Richards in the film. When they see each other again, he's just like, yeah, whatever. I'm here to kick some ass. He's got this like complete detached thing, which makes him in some ways the prototypical American action star. Like when you no longer care about any, human attachments, you have become this Ubermensch type of character. And there's a sadness to it because he's no longer this Johnny Rico person that we care about, but somehow he has become this deified version that people should worship through those newsreels that you see in Starship Troopers.
For sure. Well, I mean, and those newsreels are really interesting because, one, you see them in Robocop, you see them in Total Recall, you see them everywhere, right? He uses the newsreel as like his through line and a way to position, I think, his thoughts and the way that we should think about the problem as a whole. And I think Verhoeven has said that he sees it as a Mondrian type of painting, right? Where you have essentially a little news box, right? And then there's a hard line, and then it comes to the story. And so you have this really interesting sort of space for him to exist in. The newsreels, I think, are sort of his way of telling us as the audience who and what should we believe? How should we see this? And you have this, we kill bugs good, right? Like a good bug is a dead bug, right? And so you see a lot of the storylines that play off of that, which ultimately lead to this concept of, hey, this is really good for us, right? And Rico's like a fanatic by, day one, essentially, of joining the force. And he sees himself as like, I'm going to be the captain first. I'm going to be, the team lead, right? And you see him sort of go through these different steps of becoming, right? The person that he ultimately becomes, which is, to your point, this Ubermensch that's completely divorced from any type and semblance of emotion, which is the best possible version of himself that he could be for the cause. Right. And ultimately, that's what he wants to
like
be.
Like Robocop in that fascist society. And it's foreshadowed in, I think, maybe like the start of the second act in Starship Troopers, when he's going to sign up and everything. And there's the guy that is at the check-in desk, the scene?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Where the guy, Rico goes up there and the guy looks at it and goes, infantry. Hey, you're going to love it. Made me the man I am today. And he's got all these robotic prosthetics.
Right. He's got the two legs that are totally off. Right. How can you forget?
But I mean, that's part of that same motif. Like, that connects back to Robocop. It connects back to, like, it's this visual representation of the stripping away of humanity. Right. Yeah. And I think if there's something that Verhoeven is trying to articulate there, it's not necessarily being like ableist or the lack of the flesh or the physical humanity is what's important. He's trying to also show us a visual representation of the stripping away of the emotional context of how the heroes or perceived heroes fit into their communities, right?
Yeah.
Like, and you see this a lot too now with, have you seen this campaign that like the crazy right-wing, especially in the Christian nationalist universe, are putting out, saying like, empathy is the poison of society. Like, you have to strip away empathy. Have you seen this?
No.
Oh man. Yeah. I got to, I got to see, like, all these megachurch pastors and stuff, have been talking about this. Let's see if I can find the, yeah, here it is. MAGA-aligned figures and commentators, including Elon Musk, have framed empathy as a fundamental weakness or toxic force threatening Western civilization. This perspective, often termed a war on empathy, this is through NPR, is, a driving force to stripping away LGBTQ plus rights, the way that ICE is conducting things. If you go deep enough into, I'm on a lot of like Telegram chats. I'm in a lot of places on the internet that, I probably shouldn't be, but I like to keep an eye on what people are talking about, right? Mm. And you see in there all the time, they're talking about empathy being the disease of Western culture. It's like, it is what Verhoeven is warning us about. Like, when you start to strip away the connections that bind us together as person-to-person community members, parts of a society, that is when the systems of fascism, the systems of destruction, are able to perpetuate themselves unchallenged.
Yeah, but I think so. One thing that's interesting about war, especially under the guise of fascism, is that it clarifies. War brings clarity, war brings resolve, war allows you to do things and gives you like this moral high ground, right? So as you're watching the movie, as you're watching Starship Troopers, there's this sense of clarity that you go, oh, we do have to go out there. We've got to go out to kill those bugs or they're going to come for us, right? And it's, we give like full permission for the other in those scenarios, right? Because it's an alien. It's like, this
but, even what is an alien? I mean, this is the late 90s. This is pre 9/11. And right now we are in a scenario where, did you hear the justifications that Rubio and these guys have put out about the stuff going on with Iran? They're saying, well, Israel was going to attack Iran.
Right.
So if that happened, Iran would have tried to attack our military bases. So we decided to attack first so that they couldn't attack our military bases in case Israel attacked. And you're sitting there going like, this is the most Starship Troopers ass. They cared so much, like, at least back in the George W. Bush era, they gave somewhat of a shit about trying to convince us that their lies were true. We've gotten so deep into the Verhoeven of it.
That's it. No, and we feel safety because there's deterrence, and that's a morally clear place for us to be. So don't be worried about those casualties because it was mandatory for us to be able to control that situation. And there's no more important way to control a situation than to be able to come to it first, right? And so now you see a lot of the acceptance of this first strike, this first go at it, where you're not worried about there actually having been a war, right? So the Department of War, like classically renamed, which is exactly dystopian and 100% Verhoeven, right? That's exactly what you see there. You see those actions taking a real form. The effects of that are what are valuable and interesting, right? Because what happens to a society that agrees that deterrence in that form is important and that you always strike first? And if those things are true, then what happens next? And I think that's where we tend to look at these problems from that almost myopic perspective. Oh, well, now we see something that's obviously wrong. They did this and it was not necessarily the right move in that moment, right? But then you have the other consequences that are going to come as a result of that, and you could have thought about those, but we didn't.
And I mean, this is where it starts to get real dicey with the real world, right? Like, so Kristi Noem, they kicked her off of Department of Homeland Security. They put her in something else, whatever, right? But they kicked her out of that prominent spot. We don't really know why. Allegedly, it's because she spent all this money on her own advertising campaign thing that was, I think, what, $200 million. And I don't think it was even the money. I think it was because everything needs to glorify Trump and the advertising campaign glorified her. So I think there's more of like a narcissistic crosswire there, more so than an actual outrage over the money spent. But if you start to look at this shell game that they were doing during those congressional hearings recently, where she's being questioned and they're coming at her and they're saying like, well, you called Rachel Good and Alex Preddy, the people that got shot by ICE in Minneapolis, you called them terrorists. Do you take that back? And she wouldn't take it back. She's like, well, we have ongoing investigations into what? You came out there day one. What are you investigating if you already said they're terrorists, right? And that's, again, the idea, like you see in Starship Troopers, there's no advocate for the bugs in the same way that there's no advocate really in America for the Iranian people. And I think the conversations that we have in a real world society, as opposed to the Verhoeven universe, these pocket universes that he creates in cinema, we have this weird ability to be able to hold up people in our society, like Iranian expats and things, and go like, well, see, they're saying that they love it. Well, of course they love it because they fled Iran and their whole project has been to topple the Iranian government. And I'm not a big fan of the Iranian government and what they were doing, but at the end of the day, the Iranian people deserve to have some type of self-direction and self-governance. They don't deserve to have whatever government they were displeased with replaced by a government that we deem fit for them, right? And that is something that Verhoeven, maybe he'll do a project in the future where he touches on that complexity. But just looking at the us versus them of it, I think we just haven't even gotten that far. When you talk about first and second order thinking, as a population, American society, we're just not even there to get 3-4 steps down the line at that point.
Not right now, and not in this sort of reactionary cultural state that we live in, which is, I think, part of the reason why doing a million things at once is so effective, right? Because you're already worried about the last thing, or you're like, oh, Epstein, oh, this is a cover for that, which is a cover for this, right?
They call it.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're in that scenario where you're constantly in this flood the zone type of, you're never going to be able to have those deeper, slower thoughts, right? Because if you're essentially in fast versus slow thinking, right? And you're in this Daniel Kahneman state, you're always in fast thinking mode. This, but, problem. And you're not capable of having those deeper thoughts around the solution that you could notice, frame, make a decision after time, right? And so how do you allow for yourself to be in those spaces? And I think part of the resolution, at least from my perspective, is how do you find yourself in places where you're choosing and selecting the kinds of problems that you can be most effective in so that you can work on those? Because there's so many billions of people. How do we allow ourselves the, generosity and forethought of saying, hey, I can help here and I can trust that you're going to help over there and we can do this together. But maybe that's just wishful thinking.
Well, let's kind of end on this. Let's talk about Rico and his signing up and the whole thing about wanting to be a hero and be seen as masculine. And I think that's one of the undergirdings of fascism, is like the idea of injured masculinity, wounded masculinity, and the idea that you have to somehow reclaim it mentally and physically. You have to steel yourself, and that your body is a sort of a vessel of the state. And when you are subsumed by the state and, you know, enact the will of the state, you are reclaiming personal masculinity in its own way. There's so many issues right now with young men who I think they are feeling a little bit lost. They all want to be Rico. They want to have purpose. They want to feel admired. The things that we used to have in society, because we're going through an economic transition on multiple fronts. We're moving from different kinds of economies into new kinds of economies. Some things are broken, some things aren't. So home ownership is becoming less within reach. People are having a harder time getting new cars, and, you know, all these things are becoming hyper expensive. The markers of success are eroding, and what's being stripped away and left is this idea of masculine dominance. It's affordable, right, for you to be that kind of a man in our society. How do we convince guys who are 18, 19, 20 years old not to be a Johnny Rico?
I mean, it might sound a little bit funny, but I think it starts with, one, their ability to understand their own agency, right? To be able to have a fundamental thought, you know, before. And I think something that I think about often now is just how do you allow for someone who may be challenged to be thinking clearly, right, in those spaces, and they've deified these concepts that are these superheroes, right? And if I'm not that, then I'm nothing. And how do you reconstruct identity fundamentally? And how do you then ask someone who's there to think about thinking, right? So for me, and this is sort of when I've started to build this kind of concept of a thinker's creed, because I've started to see, hey, for someone that is maybe, you know, it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter how you think. It's a question of, how do we get back to the start? How do you go back to sort of first principles thinking, right? So how do you generate an seed that allows you to think differently, and then use that as a way to grow, so that, hey, I don't need to be that person, and I don't need to be this person. I don't need to be anything that the world has necessarily told me to be, because that's unnecessary and it's a facade, right? You're not necessarily required to be something that is essentially going to be just like given to you, right? And this happens all the time. You're given your little, hey, these are the Legos that you get, and this is what you have to build. And you don't have to be those people, right? That's one of the biggest fallacies that we're sort of driven to over the course of our lifetimes as we grow into what society deems us to be culturally acceptable. And so for me, and this is the creed that I've come up with, and I'm actually all ears because this is brand new and I've just been thinking about this, but the idea here, and I'll pull it up so I can read it verbatim. I will not mistake information for insight. I will build mental models, not mental walls. I will measure ideas by their utility, not their novelty. I will slow down to think so I can speed up to act. I will choose clarity over certainty. Others outsource their thinking. I will own mine. For me, the reason why that's so impactful for someone like that is because you have to first find agency in yourself to have a thought of your own, so that you don't immediately gravitate to all of these other net negative problems or ways of existing or being that hurt others. And the only way to do that is from a sense of self. And if you have a strong sense of self that allows you to think uniquely for yourself, then I think it sets you up broadly for the future, where I may not know where you land, but I can trust that you are going to think through that from a perspective that is honest, true, and helpful theoretically to society writ large.
Mhm. Yeah, it's powerful. Well, where can people find more about you, your work, your products?
So I have a website called remind.coach. That's where you can find the deck of cards and the system. And there's a web app to be able to learn about these models and then grow in your practice with them. And then I have a newsletter on my readjuancarlos.com website that really just dives into one mental model every single week. And we just deep dive and look at it from different perspectives. Helpful? How can you learn more? So those are the big ways.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. We got to do this again. Maybe we'll figure out another either group of movies or create or something. This is great. I hope everybody had a really cool time checking up on what we're doing over here at Mental. Make sure, if you're not already subscribed, to jump on the newsletter. You can grab it at mental.world. And if you're watching on YouTube or any of these other platforms, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, do all that great engagement stuff. Everything helps us with the algorithm. Thank you again, Juan Carlos. I really appreciate you coming down today.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the time.